Pleased to say I've been joined by Inga, CEO of Lloyd's, who's just quite literally stepped off the stage from giving a panel session on leadership in a world of interconnected and complex risks. So thank you for joining us, Inga.
Pleasure.
So first off, maybe just tell us a few of the highlights from the panel session and what you covered.
Yeah, well, there was one interesting panellist who talked about the charismatic leader. And I had got my key risks in this day and age as being geopolitical uncertainty, shift in economic power, and digitalization and technology. And he made me think, gosh, the charismatic CEO could be the biggest risk a business faces.
Yeah.
So I guess what I really took away from the session was risk is endless. And I think the job of the risk manager is just, well, it's fascinating for a start, but they're going to have to keep on top of all of these risks that are just changing all the time, and there isn't any boundary. There's almost no boundary to how you can view the risk landscape for your business. I thought it was a fascinating panel.
There was previous interviewee was talking about risk culture having to embed itself in the middle of a business, how the business is going to run, and not just an operational function anymore within a business. I'm guessing by what you're saying, you see that as well. When
I was an underwriter, if I think back in the 90s, I remember being part of a big group that wasn't just an insurance group, it was a massive conglomerate. And they sent us our first risk manager. This was in the 90s, and I was the underwriting manager, and I thought, that's my job. I manage risk for this organisation. Well, of course, what I didn't realise was that I was managing the underwriting risks that the organisation was taking on. I wasn't really managing the entire risks that the organisation faced. So I learned way back then the value of having a professional risk manager who tackles and looks at every single aspect of your business model. Fascinating world, and we're also looking at, I would say, professionalising risk management more, both within FIRMA and within the UK. Risk Manager Association, there are now real professional risk management qualifications that people can study for and get recognised for, showing that the whole world of risk is moving to a professional era that it hasn't necessarily known before, and importantly a status and recognition at the board table that it's perhaps not had before.
And I guess when one looks at an environment as unique as Lloyd's and the way it's structured and the various people around the side of it, does that throw up particular challenges, do you think, for Lloyd's London market people? And I guess as another question alongside that, we're going to be speaking to Benno later on the work he's doing on the development programme with FIRMA, introducing those people into the community too.
Lloyd's, of course, is unique because of the subscription market element and the fact that we've now got 87 syndicates, so sometimes collaborating and sometimes competing. Makes it fascinating, and also for Lloyd's has always been on the cutting edge, sort of pioneering with product, and every time something new comes into our world, the world at large, Lloyd's is there finding a solution for it. So we've got the risk angle, looking at all the emerging risks that are out there, thinking about how Lloyd's can continue at that pioneering end of product, but we've also got to think about the risks to the Lloyd's business model, the fact that insurance centres are opening up more broadly around the world. Expertise is much more broadly held now across the world, and the world is just fundamentally changing. So the risk from the product side is of concern, but also how it affects our own business model, and how we trade.
Sorry, you mentioned the geopolitical bit, and you can't avoid, in this environment particularly, not talk about Brexit, but also looking across the Atlantic, the other way to the States as well. Where do you see the fundamental changes in the context of risk management?
Yeah, well, look at Brexit for a start. So our fundamental risk mitigation strategy is setting up a subsidiary in Brussels. So that's a very practical step we're having to take, because we run the risk of the outcome of the negotiations with the UK and the EU not coming out with a framework that would enable Lloyd's to continue to write EU-based business. That would be shocking for our risk management clients, for all those businesses. So we've got to take the future into our own hands and do that. So we've had to assess the risk, and then make a fundamental step, a very practical step to mitigate that. When we look further afield and we look at the protectionism that's going on, in the last 2 years, the World Trade Organization said 228 restrictive trade practices or barriers were introduced. That's not supporting liberal trade, and particularly in reinsurance, we need that reinsurance to be spread right across the world. We all know the benefit of that, diversifying your risk and sharing the risk outside of your country. We're seeing a world that's potentially wanting to contract that and keep it within a country, which cannot be good for our entire insurance sector.
Well, it does feel like there's a lot of re-gearing starting to come into the industry. So as a final question, kind of getting back to what you spoke about today, kind of leadership, you mentioned about charismatic leaders earlier. Do you still think there's a place for that, or is it kind of nurture over nature that sits in?
I think each business, at certain stages, will need a different type of leader. There is undoubtedly room for charismatic leaders. We need charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders change the world. They tend to have the courage to take on what we've been used to as the norm and take us forward. So absolutely space for charismatic leader. Some businesses at certain times may need a more risk-averse leader. Whatever it is, the most important thing about the leader is surround yourself by people who are different to you, because they will provide the challenge that's needed for that whole business model to be successful. So that's my sort of mantra in life, is make sure you include others. The CEO does not know all the answers.
Oh, no comment. Inga, thank you for that.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.